You knew we were going to have this one. You knew it. It's one of the classics. And it's from our gospel this year, the Gospel of Matthew. Matthew, chapter 6, beginning with verse 19 through 21. You know it. Say it with me now. Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes nor thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You knew it was coming. Because what is at the center of generosity that we've been talking about all week so far? It's where our heart is. I've heard this misquoted, where your heart is, your treasure will be also, unless our passions, what we believe in, etc., etc., that's where our money will go. But Jesus tells us, no, it's the opposite. Where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be also. Which, when I first hear it, I'm kind of insulted. Jesus, are we that shallow? Where your treasure is, what you choose to invest in, speaks to what you believe. We put our money where our mouth is, literally. That's this idea of it's easy to see the human things that we talked about a couple weeks ago in the sermon text instead of the heavenly things. It's easy to see the immediate, not the future, the small things, not the larger things, the things that involve us instead of the things that involve everybody else. Protecting what is ours instead of what God has entrusted us with. I think the other reminder in this whole passage, and Lord knows, Jesus is going to hit this quite a few times in the Gospel of Matthew. You can't take it with you. In fact, if you try, God's going to have something to say. Where your treasure is, your heart will be also. That one verse will give us more than enough to talk about today. We talk about the generosity as a mark of a Christian. And I know talking about generosity turns a lot of people off. Don't tell me how to spend my money. I'm not. God is. I'm just reading the scripture. I'm with you. I presume not to talk about money. But God talks about money a lot. God talks about generosity a lot. Because God is generous with us. God is. God lavishes us with blessings, right? God's treasures of faith, family, promised lands, grace, community, the church, these treasures that God constantly gives us, vocations, gifts, our very bodies and selves, our potentials, everything, this creation, all these treasures that God has given us. It's because God's heart is with us. God has chosen to be generous with us, even though we are not always with God. God chooses that. God begs us to choose the same. God puts God's treasures out there knowing that moth and rust will consume and the thief will break in and steal. God does that for us. And there are treasures that God gives us that these things cannot happen, things that are more important. You can't steal faith. You can't consume gifts. Yeah. God chooses to put God's treasure where God's mouth is, right? Coffee, a treasure from God. What a wonderful, wonderful creation, the coffee bean, right? I mean, I know that talking about generosity can make us feel certain ways. I hope it makes you feel happy. You feel validated in the generous life you're living, the giving that you're doing. It feels good. And I invite you to share those stories. People like to hear them. It's nice, as a pastor, it's nice to hear from other people. not just clergy, that the giving does matter. I know lots of people feel this way. America's the most generous nation in the world. So lots of people that see the power of giving. Most of all, God sees this power of giving. This verse, I think, is the one that we can just, if you come out of anything from this week, for your treasure is there, your heart will be also. We can say we believe a lot of things, but where we give is more of an action. Where we give is more of a statement of faith, often than what we say. And I know that might sound controversial, but it's true. Just look at the disciples. They say they believe in Jesus, but then they go to deny Jesus, doubt Jesus, right? But in moments, God brings them back in, of course. But when they give of themselves to this life, when they commit to discipleship, some even with their very lives, that's when their life is changed. That's when what they really believe is shown through. Talk is, what's the expression? Talk is cheap. Cheap. Right? But where we put our money, our treasures, our time is very treasured right now. Where we put those, that's where our heart is. Generosity is a statement of faith, especially in these times. Let's choose to be generous and show what we believe.